Hi, and welcome to this Christian Churches of God video presentation. In this video, we will go over the dates when and the reasons why the Sabbath of the seventh day was changed to Sunday, the first day of the week. And in this short history lesson, we will also cover some other very significant changes that have happened in the church. Now, the first attack on the Sabbath was in 111 of the current era in Rome under Emperor Trajan. They began to have joint services with the communion system on Sundays, as was being held in the sun cults. Then in Rome, from 140 to 152 CE, we see they began to worship on Sundays. It wasn't being done anywhere else, only in Rome, and not until this time of 140. In Justin Martyr's writings, in his dialogue with Trypho in 140, he says, though, that they began to worship on Sundays, but they were worshiping also on the Sabbath in Rome still yet. Now in 154 CE, Attis, the bishop of Rome at that time, introduced the pagan Easter festival to the Roman Church. He is opposed by Polycarp, who was the disciple of John. And now as John, as we know, is the disciple of Christ. It is Polycarp who heads the church in the East at Smyrna and speaks for all Quartodecimans, or those who celebrate the Passover and the crucifixion on the 14th day of the first month of the temple calendar, known as Nisan or Abib. Now at about this time of 154, Justin Martyr writes his first apology to the Emperor of Rome on behalf of the Church of Rome. He explained that Christ was the great angel or great messenger of the Old Testament that gave the law to Moses. He also said on behalf of the Church of Rome to the Emperor that if they came across people who said they were Christians, and that when they died, they would go to heaven, not to believe them, because they were not Christians. This was the test of a true Christian, and a widely held belief in the church. The people who said that when they died they would go to heaven were in fact Gnostic impostors, posing as Christians, and practicing a pagan Gnostic belief of the immortal soul. Now in 180 CE, Theophilus of Antioch makes the first mention of a trias, later incorrectly translated into English as Trinity, and the initial beginnings of the Binitarian doctrine emerged for the very first time in the history of the Church. Now 12 years later, in 192 CE, less than 40 years after its introduction into the Roman Church, Bishop Victor of Rome forcibly brings in Easter over the Passover, and the Quartodeciman disputes then split the Church. Polycrates, the disciple of Polycarp, stands against this heretical Roman faction, and Irenaeus, the Bishop of Lyon, tries to intercede, but with no success. Let's move along to 200 of the current era. Now at the beginning of the 3rd century, in 200 of the current era, we still know that the Sabbath observance is widespread, as it shows to have been kept in Egypt from the Oxyrhynchus papyrus, written about 200 to 250 of the current era. This papyrus also shows that the Sabbath was opposed from Rome. 20 years later, in 220 CE, the problems of modalism emerged in the discussions between the popes in Rome and Alexandria. A distinction is attempted in the trias of the Father, Christ, and the Holy Spirit. Here, the influence of the modalism of Attis is seen in the Christian ministry from Rome, and for the first time, Christ is then elevated to God as a modal structure or an aspect of God. And by the beginning of the 4th century, in 300 CE, the priests of the pagan god Attis were complaining that the Christian ministry at Rome had stolen all their doctrines. Now let's move on to the first council of importance. In 305, we have the Council of Elvira. From Canon 26 of the Council of Elvira in 305, it shows that the Church in Spain had kept the Sabbath on the 7th day. Now Rome, in order to counteract this Sabbath keeping, introduced the practice of fasting on the Sabbath. Pope Sylvester was the first pope to do this. He was pope from 314 to 335 CE, and he ordered the churches that followed him to fast on the Sabbath. Pope Innocent, who followed him from 402 to 417, he made it a binding law to the churches that obeyed him. Now let's move on to the next council of importance in 325, the Council of Nicaea. In 325 CE, the Council of Nicaea convened, and the Easter system was harmonized for the empire, and the Binitarian structure of the god Attis was formally introduced to Christianity under Emperor Constantine. Now we know that the canons of this council were lost. However, it was later established there were only 20, as they were reconstructed from the Council of Constantinople in 381. Aberrations had entered the church through this Council of Nicaea. Among them were celibacy in the clergy, persecution by imposing penance or punishment upon Unitarians, specifically those not Binitarian, the establishment of the diocesan system, and standing prayers at Sunday worship and during the Paschal season. Now this so-called Paschal season that's spoken of was in fact the forced introduction and harmonization of Easter, known to the pagans as Ishtar, as it was being practiced in the West, in Rome, under the Attis system, and in the East with the Greeks under the Adonis system, and in Egypt under the Osiris-Isis system. This pagan festivity and festival now replaced the Bible Passover. The Nicene Creed, based on the Athanasian faith, introduces Binitarianism, which is essential to the formulation of the Trinity. It also introduces the falsehood that Christ is the only Son of the Father, therefore negating the promise to the elect as also becoming sons of God. Now this was short-lived at this time because Emperor Constantine realized that Binitarianism wasn't the majority faith in the empire at that time. So 2 years later, in 327 CE, he reestablished the Unitarian structure to the church. It is also known that Constantine, on his deathbed, was even baptized a Unitarian by Eusebius of Nicomedia. So let's move on to 366 CE and the Council of Laodicea.